Hi everybody. We're going to talk about how to make good PowerPoint slides. Now for your oral presentation, it will take place this coming week on Wednesday or Thursday, depending upon your class. And I encourage you to use a PowerPoint slide for your visual component of your presentation rather than doing a Prezi or something else, because it is still the go-to standard in business and industry. So that's what we're going to talk about here. There is some information on Blackboard about how to do a Prezi if you desire to do that, but I encourage you just to stick with PowerPoint as it is standard. The presentation itself is 5 to 7 minutes only. You get to choose who will be presenting, so you can choose one really good speaker, or if you all want to get up there, it is up to you. Okay, so in this presentation, we are going to talk about outlines, slide structure, fonts, color, background, graphs, spelling and grammar, conclusions of your presentation, and any questions that the audience might have. So first thing you want to have, usually on the second slide of your presentation, because the first slide is your title slide, is an outline of the presentation. So the previous slide, right here, if I can scroll up, this is an excellent example of an outline slide. On your outline slide, you want to use simple phrases, short phrases, 1 to 3 words long, and you want to make sure that you follow the order of your outline for the remainder of the presentation. Only place the main points, again those short words or phrases, on the outline slide and stick with it. This will help you to organize and order your presentation, and it'll also help your audience to understand what's coming next. Okay, next thing we need to talk about is slide structure. There's good slide structure and bad slide structure. We've all seen bad ones. So for good slide structure, you want to make sure that you have 1 to 2 slides per minute of presentation. So that's about 1 slide for every 45 seconds of presentation time, give or take. It's not an exact science. You want to write in point form, not in complete sentences. You don't want to have a big long paragraph of information. And 4 to 5 points max per slide. You don't want to clutter it. To avoid wordiness, only use keywords and phrases. Okay, so this is a good example of bad slide structure. And you can go ahead and go through that and read that if you like, but I'll tell you one thing. You're probably not going to. So whenever you have bad slide structure like this, it's just a big chunk of text. One of two things happens. Either your audience reads it and ignores what you're saying, or they don't read it and pay attention to what you're saying. Either way, humans are terrible at multitasking, so you don't necessarily want to have them have all the information on there and have your audience read it, expect them to read it, because they're not going to. Either that or they're going to ignore you. So that's a bad idea. Okay, good slide structure, 1 point at a time. So here on this slide, you'll see there is 1 point at the top. It'll help the audience concentrate on what you're saying. It will prevent the audience from reading ahead. It'll help you stay on track too. And it'll help you stay focused. It helps you from going off on tangents. Okay, bad slide structure. Don't use any distracting animation. In PowerPoint, you can use some animation features that make the text zoom in and out, or fade in and out, or flip around, all kinds of bells and whistles that you can use. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's okay. It's not something that you need to learn, because hopefully you'll never use it. There is one kind of animation that's okay, and that's the kind where you click on the slide as you're presenting it and the point shows up, it pops up on screen. That's fine, but the problem with the other kinds of animation is that it's distracting, and also some of those animations take a long time to complete, so it can become really weird and awkward as you're presenting, waiting for those to complete. If you do choose to use animation, the kind where the words pop on screen when you click the button, be consistent with the animation that you do use. Okay, good fonts. At least 18-point font. Remember the space that you are going to be presenting in. Most of the time it's going to look something similar to our classroom, and you are going to have a presentation location. In our case, it is the TV at the front of the room. I don't know how big it is, but it's pretty big. But also remember, some people are going to be sitting in the back, some people will be sitting in the front. And it's not so much important for the purposes of this one presentation instance, but the thing you need to remember is that when you are doing presentations in your future careers, it will be for both coworkers and bosses. And the one thing we know about bosses is that they are probably going to be older than you. And as we age, our body starts to betray us in fun and interesting ways. So you want to make sure that those older people, your bosses, the people that pay you, are going to be able to see what you're presenting. So that second point there, different size points for the main points and any secondary or sub points. The sub point is 24 point font and the primary point is 36 point font. I'm sorry. Yes. 24 point font to 28 point or 36 point is totally fine. Anything smaller than that, and I think you're probably running the risk of having all of your stuff, all of your points smushed in at the top, and you're not going to take and make good use of all of the white space in the entire slide. You don't want to have a big chunk of white space at the bottom, so use the space that you're given. Keep it simple, straightforward, to the point, and make sure that you're using a font size that is big enough but not oversized or undersized. 18 point minimum, bigger is better though. And you always want to use a standard font like Times New Roman or Arial or Calibri. Just don't ever use silly fonts. Okay, bad fonts. Here, if you are using a small font, the audience will not be able to read what you are saying. Especially again, as we get older, we're more and more incapable of reading small things. So don't use teeny tiny font. 18 point minimum, bigger is better. Don't capitalize at any point on your presentation unless it's absolutely necessary, like it's in a quote, something similar to that. Don't use a complicated font. Script fonts are the worst. So if it looks like cursive, don't use it. And also don't use things like Comic Sans. Don't use things that would be appropriate for maybe an elementary school. Know your audience. If you're doing a presentation for an elementary school audience, then go for it. Most of us are not going to be in that situation ever. So remember, use a font that's appropriate for the given audience. Okay, color. Use a color that contrasts sharply with the background. So the example here, I used a dark color for the major points and the sub points, dark blue with a light background, super high contrast. And then I also used a different color for the title of each slide, but it's consistent. You can see it's high enough contrast, but it doesn't look ugly together. And you want to make sure that you use that color to reinforce the logic of your presentation structure. The title is one color, and the points and subpoints are another color. And you want to make sure that you use color to emphasize a point, but only occasionally. You might not have any points to emphasize in this particular presentation, or you might. Either way is fine, but make sure that you don't use the emphasis color consistently throughout every slide. Make sure you use it only occasionally. All right, bad color. That yellow on white is obviously very low contrast. You don't want to have super low contrast. It's also kind of ugly. You don't want to use color for decoration. It's distracting and annoying, and I have seen presentations done by professors that use this kind of thing where you use it for decoration. It's not very pretty. Don't use a different color for main points and sub points. The same color throughout is appropriate. The sub points will be a different font size than the main points. They'll be somewhat smaller, but they should be the same color. And then don't try to be creative with your coloring. Just be simple, straightforward, and consistent with the colors that you do use. Okay, backgrounds. Good backgrounds. Use backgrounds like this one. It is simple. It is attractive. It has a light background with a dark text on it. And professionals who talk about and teach about how to give oral presentations consistently suggest that you use a light background with a dark text. So you want to use the same background consistently throughout your presentation. Do not go switching horses midstream. Okay, bad background. I've actually seen this on a student presentation some years ago, which is why I included it. It's always a good reminder, don't do anything like this. They were trying to be creative and eye-catching, which is true. I mean, it worked, but it's also very unprofessional. So the background there it's pretty. I like rainbows, that's cool, but don't put them on an oral presentation, especially if it's a professional oral presentation. So you don't want to have any backgrounds that are distracting, difficult to read from. Don't get too creative here, and be consistent with the backgrounds that you use. And also this little wizard guy, any kind of images that just don't really have any method or means of being there. I don't understand why he's there. Don't do things like that. Okay, good graphs. Anytime you can represent information with a graph or a visual of some kind or a chart, then you should do so. People are able to digest data, especially complicated data, especially trends, if it is in some kind of visual format. It's harder to understand it if it's just a bunch of words on a page. This also helps you to keep your slides not so cluttered. So always title your graphs. Let's look here at this fun little chart. Okay, on the left you've got blue pens and red pens, and you have a bunch of numbers. On the top row you've got January, February, March, April. We don't have a title. We don't know what year it is. We have no idea what the purpose is, and we don't know what those numbers mean. Are they in individual sales? Are they in dozens? Are they in thousands? Are they in stores? We don't know. So this is a better graph. You've got a title. You've got a y-axis and an x-axis. You've got blue pens and red pens. They're clearly visually identified each month. How many of them are sold. The only thing we don't have on the left-hand side is what the y-axis means, 0 to 100. Again, is that in number of pens sold individually, or is it in dozens or thousands? We just don't know. So here we have a really, really, really ugly graph. It is terrible. Okay. So here, down here, we've got exactly what is wrong with this one. It has minor grid lines. The font is too small. The colors are illogical and, in my opinion, ugly. The title is missing and the shading for both the the vertical lines and the background. Let me get back to it. Is really just kind of ugly, and it's bad. So here you'll see the minor grid lines. Instead of one line for every, or one horizontal line for every 10 units, they've got it for every 2. That's unnecessary. The shading here and the shading in the background, the gray, also not necessary. Also, why are they using green and yellow when it's clearly red and blue? Okay. Moving down. Spelling and grammar. You always want to proof your slides. There are several of you in a group, and you have the benefit of connecting with one another and proofing your slides and all of your work to ensure that there are no grammar mistakes or spelling mistakes. I see it all the time, and there's really no need for that or excuse for it because there's so many of you to go over stuff. The biggest offenders are the their, and theirs, and the your and yours. So make sure you're using the right word and you think it means, and you mean what it actually means. And then, of course, if English is not your first language, have somebody from the United States or a native speaker help you to proof for any grammar or spelling issues, also issues with meaning. Similarly, if you ever have to give a presentation in a language that is not your first, make sure you get a native speaker to help you out. And of course, you'll need a conclusion slide. You want to use an effective and strong closing because your audience is most likely to remember your final words. Your conclusion can summarize the main points of your presentation, and you can make suggestions for future avenues of research, or because this is an oral presentation over a recommendation report, that you can recommend to your audience that they take your final recommendation and enact it. And then the very last slide that you will have is your question slide. You want to end your presentation with a simple one-word slide that just says questions. This helps to do two things. Let the audience know that you're done giving a presentation. They kind of need to snap back to reality and start asking questions should they have any. But it also lets you know that it is the end of your presentation and you need to stop talking. Especially if you are an inexperienced public speaker, you get nervous and you might stumble over your words and you might not know when to stop. I've heard people yammer and yammer and yammer, and I have been one of those people who just didn't know when to stop, especially when I was younger. So if you're one of those people, that question slide will tell you, okay, now it's time to stop. Question slide pops up, you say, that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions? And that's it. That's the end of your presentation. So hopefully this helped you out a little bit. These tips and recommendations are not just for a presentation that you're going to do in this class, but for really any presentation that you need to give, whether it be in the university or in your place of employment. So hopefully this helped. Thanks.